Welcome to The Plunge with Derek Holser. As we forge ahead with Tolkien's Greatest Characters mega series, I'm so excited and honored to welcome to today's episode none other than Dr. Bradley Birzer, Russell Amos Kirk Chair in American Studies and Professor of History at Hillsdale College. Brad and I had a fantastic time discussing the mercurial and sometimes beguiling hobbit, Pippin. I think you're going to discover some new insights and some fresh revelations about this unique character with quite the royal lineage. Before we jump into that, I just want to mention briefly that Brad has also authored two books on Tolkien, one coming in April of 2026, that is Tolkien and the Inklings, Men of the West, as well as earlier published J.R.R. Tolkien's Sanctifying Myth, Understanding Middle-earth. I encourage you to get both of those after you listen to our conversation. I know you'll want to hear more from Brad, and also check him out on Substack. Without further ado, I'm so glad you could join us, and I'm grateful to Brad for being willing to take the plunge. Let's dive in with that full of a took. Well, I'm super excited because, again, a great gratitude to Landon Lofton, who is the connector for many of the guests on this series. But Landon mentioned my next guest here, Brad Birzer, and I'm excited to meet with you, Brad, and discover the character that you've chosen for Tolkien's greatest characters. How are you?
Oh, I'm great, thanks, Derek. It's a cloudy, muggy day here. Probably different than Seattle. I'm in southern Michigan right now, but it's been a great morning. So things are going really well, and I'm glad we get a chance to meet. I enjoyed our interaction on email, and I think we were both kind of being humorous about a couple of things, so
That's
that was
right.
good. I thought, okay, Derek's a good guy.
Yeah, I like to
So
have a good
he
time.
puts up with my stupidity. So no, that was great. And I'd mentioned to you, and sorry for your listeners here, but I had not, because I'm on summer schedule, and we start back on Thursday, but I have not shaved for a while, and my wife was giving me a hard time, my kids were giving me a hard time, and I thought, well, if we're going to do this with video, I have to shave. So anyway, that's so after a couple of weeks of total laziness, yeah. So anyway, you get me as I am.
Yeah, you look fresh pressed and ready to go.
That's great. Good.
So the semester starts next week, you said.
Yeah, this week actually,
Okay.
well, classes start next week as we're recording this. I know you'll be posting it later. But yeah, we start next week Wednesday, but we start our meetings on Thursday. It's pretty neat. We've got this military history program that every year we have a 1 day retreat. And I'm not a military historian, but they invite non-military historians. We just meet for the day. And we'll meet out Hillsdale, the college. We have a shooting range that's really nice. So we'll meet out at the shooting range and have a full day on military history. And then we have, I don't know what you would call it. We just have pre-opening meetings then all day Friday. So our president will give a kind of state of the college address. And yeah, so this is the last week of summer basically. So
Yeah. Yeah.
so it's perfect timing, Derek.
Good. Well, we're recording this August 19th, and out here at least it's mild. Current air temperature is 65 degrees.
Oh, oh, I'm jealous. That
Yeah.
sounds great.
Well, you won't be jealous of me in December when the sun sets at 3:30 and there's just mist constant. Um, anyway, you mentioned school starting up, so I'd love to hear about you mentioned Hillsdale. For those who don't know, what is Hillsdale and what are you doing there and
Sure.
how did you get there?
Yeah, this is my 27th year. So my career has really been here. I taught briefly at a small Catholic college in Fort Wayne, Indiana, and then a Catholic college in Helena, Montana, Carroll College. And then I ended up teaching at the University of Texas, San Antonio for a year. And then this job opened up here at Hillsdale in southern Michigan. Hillsdale is I don't even know how to describe it exactly. It's a fiercely independent liberal arts school. And we were founded by abolitionists in 1844, and we were the first college to admit black students in America. In
Wow.
fact, we were college blind, colorblind from day one. And we were the first college to allow women to earn a liberal arts degree. So it's a very proud heritage, radical, kind of neat, wonderful heritage.
Yeah.
And we ended up during the Civil War, almost 500 of our 500 men signed up and fought for the North. In fact, in two critical battles at Gettysburg on day one and day two. So it's a neat place, and I feel that tradition very strongly walking around here. But we're kind of a great book school. Everything half of our half of our hours that students take is core. So they have to take philosophy and religion, history of ideas, literature, great books. It's so half of it. So they basically get to choose what they want to do junior and senior year, but freshman and sophomore year, all students, whatever their majors are going to be, take the same classes. So it's a really rigorous place, and it's been great. I love it. Absolutely love it.
That's wonderful. So you've been there 27 years.
Yeah,
What tell me a little bit about Brad prior to that in terms of your own upbringing and how you came
sure.
to choose
Oh,
this
thanks, Derek.
vocation. Yeah.
Yeah, well, so my mom's was a teacher. Still, my mom will be 89 here in a week. She was a teacher all of her life. Her dad was a teacher as well as during World War II. He was Army intelligence, so really interesting guy. And before that, they had all been farmers, wheat farmers in Kansas. And then before that, and we're all German. I'm 98.7% Southern German by my 23andMe count, anyway. And but they lived in Russia for 100 years. They maintained their German communities, but they lived in Russia, and then they moved to Kansas. And so my family is still a lot of farmers, but my side of the family went into teaching for the most part, and
Hmm.
so that's how I came to it, and it's been a wonderful career. I couldn't ask for anything better. I'm not sure I could do anything else, actually. I don't know. I certainly would not have been good in business or engineering, maybe law, but I don't think so.
Yeah.
So it was a good path. And
Well,
Derek, how about you? Are you in academia as well?
yeah. So I was going to say I've been there and done that. Law's not as, sexy as they make it out on TV, but
Sure.
I've got three prongs to my career, and author, educator, and attorney. And depending upon the season of life, I was doing
Yeah,
one more than the other. And
that's
so
great.
yeah, I've the last course I taught was just after COVID. And as I mentioned, we relocated out here and kind of navigated to a new phase. And am currently in the midst of writing a 7 book middle grade fantasy series, as
Wow.
well as doing this. So this is like my classroom outlet. And I always enjoyed having guest lecturers. I always enjoyed having very, very robust dialogue as part of my
Yeah,
class structure. And so this is like sort of curating conversations I would be having in the classroom and making them available to the public. So,
great.
yeah.
And so Derek, where I know you're in Seattle now, but where are you from originally?
I grew up in Kentucky, like
Okay.
you, German heritage, my
Yeah.
last name, Holzer.
Yeah,
Uh,
sure.
and that was modified, I think, when people immigrated. But
Hmm.
um, my father, too, was in Army intelligence, and I ended up being
Neat.
born in Berlin as a consequence. So he was
Wow.
stationed there during Vietnam, and I was
During the
born in the
Cold
Army
War.
hospital. Yeah, yep. So, and then lived in the Midwest, spent a little bit of time up there in Indiana. You mentioned Fort
Okay.
Wayne.
Yeah.
Was in a little town called Crown Point, not far
I
from
know Crown Point.
Chicago.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then
That's
Louisville,
a nice
Kentucky.
area. Crown Point's really nice.
Yeah. I was
Nice
too small. I
community.
couldn't tell you much about it.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
But the
And
neighbor's
where
yard
and
was fun to play in.
good memories. And you
Yeah.
said Louisville as well?
Louisville, Kentucky. Yeah.
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 It's great.
And then a long stretch in Virginia, which is where I did a master's and law degree. And then
Okay.
out here on the West Coast, since 2020.
Okay, that sounds
Yeah.
great. Good
Now,
journey, good American journey.
yeah. Now,
Even with the Berlin birth.
that's right. I'd love to know your specialty. Obviously, you're a gifted teacher, but what's your subject matter and how did you develop that passion? Is there any spark to that?
Yeah. So eh, stop me if I go on too long about this, Derek. But my expertise, such as it is actually in American history. And my expertise goes from the American Revolution up through the Civil War. And so I teach all that at Hillsdale. My love of Tolkien and the Inklings is something on the side. And, because I'm at this little liberal arts college, I actually get to teach Tolkien and the Inklings about every third year or so. I get to teach it. So, but my main duties are to teach American Revolution, Saxonian America, and then American Civil War. So I have to do that, and I love it. I absolutely love it. I do those 3 semesters in a row, and then always my fourth semester, I get to choose something else that I want to do. And that's usually when I'll do something like the Inklings. But I've got a course as well that I've developed, and it's called Christian Humanism. And we still go through a lot of Tolkien and Lewis, but I also do a lot of T.S. Eliot and some guys that no one's really heard of anymore. They were very famous in their day and age, but a Harvard professor by the name of Irving Babbitt and a Princeton professor by the name of Paul Elmer Moore.
Okay.
Really fascinating guys. They were the teachers of Eliot. So T.S. Eliot was their student, and it's where he gets a lot of his ideas. So I basically, in this course, we start off with Babbitt and Moore, and then we do about 3 weeks on Eliot, and then I do Lewis and Tolkien, and we also do Willa Cather as well. And then I'll end with Ray Bradbury and talk about a kind of lineage there. And that's really fun. I find that the students really enjoy just kind of going through that lineage of different thinkers. So I have a great time with that.
That's
Yeah,
fascinating.
I mean, for what it's worth, Derek, I feel as passionate about the American Revolution as I do about Tolkien. Uh,
Okay.
they're
Okay.
both
Well,
loves,
I've got
even though they have
two.
nothing to do with each other.
Well, I bet we could find some threads, but there's a couple of follow-up questions I have. Or one's a comment. Where I lived in Virginia is Virginia Beach, and so Williamsburg, as you mentioned, the Revolution, Jamestown,
Yeah,
Yorktown, all of
right.
that, very frequently visited, and of course,
Nice.
field trips to there and the capital. The state of Virginia is just full of such rich history in
Yeah,
that regard.
it's
The
fantastic.
yeah, the other thing that I'd love for you to make a comment if you're comfortable is one of the things that I love about history is it reveals the uniqueness of America as what I would say a place of high volatility and
Mm,
therefore high transformation and evolution and growth. There's a connection between the amount of robust combativeness that has, I think, been a hallmark of the country since its founding.
hmm.
But we tend to think, this is my commentary, and I'd love for you to correct or support this, that we tend to think whatever period we're occupying is the most radicalized, fractionalized, polarized ever. And
Yeah.
I'd love if you'd lend some commentary to that from your own expertise.
Well, yeah, thanks, Derek. And I love what you said. I love how you put that. I'll say this about America, and we could disagree or agree on this. From my standpoint, we are both the most traditional people in the world, and we're also the most radical people in the world. And I think it's a very healthy tension overall. But Ray Bradbury, and I love the way he put this. He always said that we were a nation of blasphemers. That is, we're always challenging something. And whether we're challenging the British or our ability to go to the moon, I think he's right about that. And yet we're deeply rooted in things. So one of my all-time favorite speeches in American history was a speech that Calvin Coolidge, of all people, gave on the 150th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. And he gives this speech and he says, if we believe all men are created equal, that's final. If we believe all men are created by their creator and endowed with certain inalienable rights, that's final. There's no more discussion. There's no more debate. All that we have to do is make it real.
Mm.
And so for me, as I look at American history, civil rights movement and so forth, I think so much of American history has been making the Declaration real and trying to, not just for white men, but for it to go beyond that. But it's still rooted deeply in tradition. And that's what I find such a paradox for America. We have this love of our founding, and it's a very healthy love, I think. But we also realize that the founding is incomplete. And so we're always trying to make that real. And I think that's the great struggle. So on one hand, we're immensely traditional, and on the other hand, we're immensely radical. And I think in my own way of thinking, that paradox makes sense. But
Yeah.
I think that's sometimes hard to convey to students.
Well, I'm going to take that quote from Mr. Bradbury that we're a nation of
Oh,
blasphemers. That fits perfectly. Absolutely.
yeah, yeah, I love that. And again, he's no historian, but he has such great insight
Yeah.
on American culture and who we are. So beautiful.
Oh man. Well, we'll have to have you back on for more of those details, but let's turn into Mr. Tolkien now.
Sure.
And I'd love to hear about your first encounter with his work, and then
Okay.
what led you to choose the character you chose for today's conversation.
Sure. Again, stop me if I go on too long about this, but so I'm brother number three in my family, so I'm the third. My oldest brother's 8 years older. My older brother's 5 years older. And so Derek, I'm 57,
Okay.
and I turned 10 in 1977, and I turned 10 a week before the Silmarillion came out. And my oldest brother turned 17 on September 23rd, a week after the Silmarillion came out. And he was given that as a gift by my mom. And I took it from him, even though I was only 10 years old. I absolutely loved the cover. It's one of Tolkien's own illustrations called The Mountain Path. And I was so taken with that cover and I wasn't ready for it at all, but I tried to read the Silmarillion probably 10 or 15 times. And I just kept reading that introduction about creation. I mean, to this day, and I'm a practicing Catholic, but to this day, I cannot read or teach Genesis, which I do every fall. I teach Genesis as one of our core texts, but I can't do it without thinking of Tolkien and that opening. So, whether it warped me or shaped me, however you want to put it, that introduction completely has shaped my own way of thinking about God
Hmm.
and about what creation is. And so, 2 years later, so when I was 12, I had a lawn mowing business and I saved up my money. And we actually, I think about how amazing this is now. I grew up in a town of 32,000 people, but we had three bookstores in
Mm.
this town. And I rode my bike down to one and I bought The Hobbit and the trilogy and just devoured it when I was 12. And I have tried to read it about every other year. Again, I'm 57, so I'm not
Wow.
even sure how many times I've read it. But I just keep going back to it. It's not only very good for my soul, it's good for my brain, but it's also, I mean, it's kind of like what we were just talking about with the Declaration. It's my touchstone, and I can go back to it and then go on to other things once I've done that. But I keep going back to it over and over again. So I had a wild moment. I wrote my dissertation on the American founding, and I was looking at diplomacy during the American founding, and I got kind of burnt out of it. I just grad school was great. I enjoyed it, but it was too much. And yet I knew I really wanted to be a writer. And so I was with my one of my closest friends, a guy named Winston Elliott, and we were driving around and he said, "Well, what are you going to do with the dissertation?" And I said, "Well, I don't really want to do anything with it. I'm kind of sick of it." And he said, but you want to be a writer? And I said, yeah, definitely. And he said, well, if you could write a book about anything, what would you do? And without question, without hesitation, I said, oh, I'd write a book about Tolkien. And he said, do it. And he had a lot of connections in the public policy world and so forth and with publishers. And he said, I'll do whatever I can to get it published. And so that's what I did. I was right out of grad school. And I desperately wanted to be a writer, and I wanted to write about Tolkien. So that's where my first book came from. And it was great that this guy is still a very close friend of mine. In fact, he's godfather of my daughter who's getting married in May. But yeah, he's been great, and certainly has been a constant friend and encourager in all of that. So that's where my Tolkien, yeah, comes from. So it's
Beautiful.
lifelong.
Yeah, beautiful. And the thought strikes me as you teach Genesis as you said, I believe you were 8 when you picked up the Silmarillion, uh, and the effect of the language that Tolkien uses, the epic and grand nature of his depictions of things, I imagine is a wonderful companion to the rather, I mean, it's elegant and beautiful, but the text in the scripture does not leaves a lot to the
Right,
imagination,
right, which is
and
great in and of
right,
itself.
right,
Yeah,
but he provides a bit of a
yeah,
spark to that imagination for a young boy. Um,
yeah, absolutely. And I think, I think what Tolkien, gosh, I mean, we could talk a lot about this, Derek, but I really do think, I mean, everything Tolkien did smacks of genius. I mean,
mhm.
I'll throw the gauntlet down for a moment, Derek, and feel free to disagree with me, but I am firmly convinced that 500 years from now, people will read Tolkien in the way that we read Dante or Homer or Virgil. I think he is our 20th century myth maker.
Mm,
And so I think there's such a sense of depth in his mythology. Right? He's not writing literature. It's mythology. It's
yes,
beyond literature.
yes.
And that, so I really do think that when people study our era, that will be the story that they go to and will look at. And I think Lewis will still be read. I don't think at quite the same level Tolkien
Hmm.
is. Lewis, outside of mere Christianity, well, abolition of man, but it's so rooted in time. And mere
Right.
Christianity is so rooted, whereas Tolkien's not rooted. It's not about Stalin, it's not about Hitler, and yet
Sure.
it is,
Right.
right? I mean, it's about all evil everywhere. Uh, so I mean, I think that it's transcended our moment in a way that allows our moment to be understood. And so, what I was going to say, and sorry, I'm detouring myself, uh, but what I was going to say is, I think that when we look at something like the opening to the Silmarillion, that's a stroke of genius. I
Hmm.
mean, the fact that Tolkien is a devout Catholic, and I think is a Platonist, can give us a new view of Genesis. That's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah.
A text that's been debated for 4,000 years, and here Tolkien modifies it, or maybe doesn't modify, but he expounds upon it and gives us new insights. That's incredible.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I would love for your prophetic utterance to come true in terms of Tolkien's place. But
Well,
I would add an appendix to that. My hope and aspiration is that Mr. McDonald gains more traction in his own right. Um, but that's a whole nother conversation.
yeah, and I saw that you had done a number of podcasts on
Yes.
McDonald.
Yes.
And my daughter, my oldest daughter, just loves George MacDonald. And I read The Princess and the Goblin, but I haven't. I've got on my nightstand at the back of the North Wind,
Uh-huh.
and I love The Princess and the Goblin. I thought it was fantastic, but I have not. I'm not. I have not dived. I have not dived in. I've not gone in as much as I should, and so I appreciate what you've done with him very
Well,
much.
yeah, it's been a pleasure. Now, with the Tolkien characters, you have chosen a fool of a took, and so I'm curious if you'd tell us. I think I quoted that correctly.
Yeah,
Maybe I've
right.
okay. If you would tell us why you chose Pippin.
Yeah, well, so when you emailed me originally, Derek, I was very excited about the possibility of, and I sent you back a couple of people, a couple of characters that I would have liked to have talked about. I mean, certainly we could, talk Tolkien day and night. There's so much to talk about. But I'm struck, especially as I get older. I think when I was younger, the story of Pippin and Merry was fun, but it didn't do that much for me. And as I've gotten older, and I keep reading The Lord of the Rings, I find myself more and more attracted to Pippin because I think that, we always focus on Frodo and Sam, as we should. Frodo and Sam. I mean, Sam is probably the real hero of the story in all kinds of ways. And we know that Tolkien wrote The Lord of the Rings to be all seen from the Hobbit's perspective, right?
Hmm.
So this is not from man's perspective or the elf or the dwarf perspective, but absolutely from the Hobbit's perspective. And so I started thinking about that and thinking, well, there's so many moments in the story where it's just Pippin and Merry. And then later on, it's just Pippin. And then it's Merry as well, but they're not even together by the time we get to the Return of the King. And I was really struck just looking back at the story that if you look at Tolkien's plot and what he's doing in The Lord of the Rings, Frodo, and I think Frodo is a priestly figure. I think he's meant to be the priest of the story. He bears the burden, he bears the sin, right, that he takes with him with the ring. And so, in some ways, Frodo's uninteresting because we already know what his path is. And I think anybody with even a hint of Christian background can figure out pretty quickly this is what's going on. He's bearing this kind of priestly role in doing this. But Pippin is a mischievous character. He's got, there's a bit of not a trickster to him, but he's young. Remember, he's only 29, and that would be the equivalent for us of being about 17, right? He's not come of age yet. 33, he comes of age. So he's still 4 years away of coming of age. Again, about 17, 16, 17 for us. So he's not an adult. He's a teenager, basically. Again, equivalent, a teenager. And you see that in his youth. And yet, you talked a moment ago, you said a fool of a toque. But remember, he's also the son of Paladin. And I
Mm.
think that's really important that they use the name Paladin, that Tolkien uses that. He's also seen as the prince of the halflings when he's walking around in Minas Tirith. And he's mistaken for royalty. And I love that. Here it's just a great moment that this halfling is seen as the prince. And so it just got me really thinking, what does Pippin do? Because all along, Pippin is so central to the plot of the story of what's happening. And again, I think we would say, and rightly so, if someone said, Brad, tell me who the three main characters are, we would say Frodo, Aragorn, and Gandalf. And yet there's this undercurrent
Uh-huh.
of Pippin and Merry who are doing really important things, and they're advancing the plot all along. So Derek, I don't know if that makes sense, but
Yeah,
I just, yeah, the more I reread the story, the more I'm taken with Pippin.
I
And
can.
I think he's, yeah, go
Yeah,
ahead, please.
sorry. I can appreciate that. Myself, I'm just a few years behind you in chronology
In
here,
age,
and
yep,
yep.
yep.
And as I have entered my 50s, there is a sense that there's plenty of life left, but it's coming quicker. And
That's for
there
sure.
there is that for me, there's a draw to reflect back on the virtues of childhood and that
Mm,
lightness of being that can only be, for me, spiritually expressed as true trust that God is good and that He does what is good, despite whatever I'm observing. And there's a characterization of Pippin that has that lightness of being in, and it's perhaps it's presented as naivety, and yet there's a strength to it. So I'd love for you to talk about that with respect to his nature and
Yeah.
its contrast with the serious, somber everything else that's happening.
Yeah, this is fantastic, Derek. I love the way you put that. And let me step back from it for just a moment and try and put it this way. I think that one of the most fascinating aspects of Tolkien and Lewis is that they know how to make good interesting. And that is a really rare skill for any writer to be able to do that. And think about Lewis with Eustace in Narnia,
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
Or with Mark in That Hideous Strength. These are
Yeah.
bad guys who
Yeah.
become good. And
Yeah.
it's believable that they become good. And they struggle, they suffer to become good. Whether it's the kind of more childish Eustace where he has to get rid of the dragon skin, or it's Mark who has to figure out how to work with his wife. And that beautiful closing scene. Actually PG-13, right? In
Right.
That Hideous Strength, but gorgeous, right? Just such
Hmm.
a moment there. And Tolkien does that as well. Tolkien knows how to make good interesting. And, just juxtapose that for a moment. I very much respect and like Stephen King, but you would never accuse Stephen King of making good interesting. He dwells on the evil. And you'll get pages upon pages of a rape scene or a brutal murder or something like that. And it drives the story. And don't get me wrong, I do respect Stephen King. And I think a novel like Salem's Lot is actually a very serious novel. I know he writes frivolous stuff too, but I think that's a serious novel. And I think he thought it was a serious novel when he was writing it, and there's a beauty to it. But it's so dark, and it's
Yes.
unremittingly dark at times.
Right.
And that's where Tolkien and Lewis, they know how to make beauty. They know how to make it, and it doesn't become Pollyannish, and it's not just a simple fairy story. It really is real. And there are just so few writers who can do that. And I think George MacDonald is one. Again, from my limited understanding of him, I think Barfield as well is able to do that. Not that he wrote a lot of fiction, but when he did, he makes it interesting. I think Willa Cather does very well. I think Ray Bradbury does. But again, it's a rare skill. It's much easier to write evil than it is to write good. And that I think is distracting. And so Pippin, I love the way you put it, Derek. There's a naivete to him. But I would say this as well. There's a true innocence that's not
Mm.
affected. It's a real innocence to Pippin. He is a good guy. And he only wants to serve others. But he's mischievous. And so he gets into trouble. But it's a fun trouble, and think about even when he does get into trouble, when he drops the pebble in Moria, right? And it wakes everything up. He's a kid. Every kid wants to drop a rock into a well. That's what you do, right? I mean,
Right.
you want to see how deep it is. You want to, I mean, that's just, it's such a boy thing to do. And, even later when he picks up the Palantir, of course he wanted to see what that was.
Of course.
Here's this object, and all of his elders are telling him, don't look at it, right? And they take it away from him. Well, he's obsessed with looking at it. It's what every
Of
kid would
course.
do.
Right.
So, I mean, his mischievousness is natural. It's not evil at all.
No.
It's
Yeah.
natural.
Yeah.
And again, and I like the way you put it. There is a naivete, but it's not an affected one. It's just
Right.
genuine in who he
Yeah,
is.
and that playfulness, I honestly am reminded of some of the accounts of Christ in the Gospels,
Mm,
and like
yes,
one that's and part of it, of course, is how we actually read the text. I mean, it's again flat, so it's difficult to infer the tone of voice that might have
right.
been with the expression. But I think of the encounter with Jesus and Nathaniel and the fig tree, and the way that Jesus says, it's translated in the King James, "Behold, a man in whom there is no guile." That
Right.
that not just the actual terminology, which I think is another term we could use for Pippin, but
Hmm.
Also perhaps the way it's delivered, a little cheeky maybe. I don't know because I wasn't there, but I could see you can't be Jesus and have children love to come to you and not be playful. Like it's terms of the agreement. If you're going to engage with children, you must be playful. If it's going to be authentic and two-way. So anyway, that
Well,
that's
Derek, that is wonderful. And I would assume Jesus had a great sense of humor. I mean, look at his
right.
charisma, right? I mean,
Right.
he was so charismatic. He
Yeah.
defines it. So yeah, I mean, he had, and and I think the reverse of that is true as well. I often think about Jesus on the cross and think about how he must feel that only John showed up of his male friends. Right? I mean, we always talk about Peter betraying him and Judas betraying him, but they all did. And
Yeah.
that had to have hurt. Like, man, I'm sure he was very happy John was there, but to think of all my best friends, right?
Yeah.
And that's that human element that Jesus had to have felt, even if he's God. He
Correct.
had to have felt that. And
Yeah.
so the reverse is true as well. I think he's funny. And I think there
Mhm.
are times that he probably was cracking up and having a good time. So I love that.
Uh, do you have any thoughts or examples of Pippin's uh, virtues on display that are pivotal to the story arc or just really left an impression on you?
Well, they're the same ones that Sam has, right? There's just this intense loyalty, even when you don't know what's going to happen. And so I love that moment right after the Council of Elrond, where Elrond says that neither Merry nor Pippin can go. They can't be part of the Nine. And Pippin's furious. And he says, either you let me go or you're going to have to imprison me. Right there, and Elrond says something to the effect of, "Well, if you knew what was before you, you wouldn't go." And Gandalf says, "Yeah, none of them know." Right? That, and
Right.
that's part of the virtue is that they're willing to do this even though they don't know what it means.
Yeah.
And I think that's incredible about Pippin. And Pippin's clever, right? It's Pippin who throws off the elven cloak even
Mm.
though he cherishes it when they're being, yeah, when they're captive by the orcs. It's Pippin who figures out that the orc is looking for the ring, and so he starts talking like Gollum to trick. And again, I think part of that is his cheek, to use a term Tolkien would use, right? That doesn't necessarily come off natural for a Kansan to say, but that very British, the idea of showing cheek. And I mean, there's just something about that where you can, again, here's Pippin, the teenager, who's basically saying, yeah, you're probably going to eat me in the next 5 minutes, but I'm going to get a quip in and I'm going to tell you you're wrong. Right. I mean, I think there's just, and again, that's that innocence, but it's a beautiful innocence overall. And, and of course, even at the end of the story, at the end of The Lord of the Rings, where Pippin, he's not jealous that Merry had battlefield success. He feels inadequate because he hasn't lived up to Merry. And so when Pippin goes into battle, and of course it's a desperate battle at the walls of Mordor, he's not trying to best Merry, he's trying to be worthy of Merry. And I just think that's great. Yeah.
Yeah.
And he kills the troll.
Wow.
Here's the smallest creature kills the largest creature,
Yeah.
right? He gets him with his blade, and then the troll falls on him, and we don't know if he's alive or dead. But that's another. It's just Tolkien's genius in the way
Yeah.
he writes that. But
Oh
yeah,
man.
so it's great, and that's a David and Goliath right there moment, right?
Right. Oh, very
So
clearly. Very
yeah,
clearly. Uh, from your research and your own work in Tolkien's writings and correspondence, is there anything that you would love to bring to the conversation with respect to the hobbits generally, as these ordinary folk thrust into extraordinary circumstances, and the even the lineage that he creates with respect to the Took family as
yeah.
differentiated from others? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, and I'm embarrassed about this a little bit, Derek, because I cannot remember the scholar's name right now. But there's a scholar, either his first name or last name is Patrick at Dallas,
Okay.
who's a professor, and I just can't remember his name right now. But he wrote a beautiful article about basically if you look at the fellowship, it is the church. The fellowship is the church. It is, moving from Christmas, because they leave on December 25th, and the ring is destroyed on March 25th, which is the traditional day of Easter. So you've got this just beautiful, it's sacred space, it's sacred time, and it's not over the top. It's not Tolkien rubbing his Catholicism in your face, but it's there, and I think we'd be foolish to ignore it. To say that it's not there, because clearly you don't leave on Christmas unless that matters, and you don't have victory on Easter unless it matters. But I love the way John Patrick, yeah, I can't remember, but I love the way
Uh,
he put this.
James Patrick.
James Patrick.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love the way he put this, where it is, the church, and you think about, you've got an elf, you've got a dwarf, you've got two men, you've got a wizard, and you have four hobbits. So basically, everybody's represented. Black, white, male, female, doesn't matter, right?
Hmm.
Everybody's a part of this. And yet, in this diversity, you have this unity of purpose, and it's traversing all of Middle Earth and going from one safe haven to another, but always in between those safe havens in total danger, beset by darkness. And, for me, Derek, that to me is St. Augustine's City of God. I mean, that is what we are as, a pilgrimage, as a city of God. We are marching through the city of man, and the city of man is not kind at all. It's
Hmm.
brutal. It hates us. It tries to knock us down. It uses us when it can use us, but it's not the same thing. And yet, and I love this as well, to be a citizen of the city of God means we always have to be charitable in the city of man. Right? We can't
Right.
use the tools of the city of man. In fact, we have to witness to them and maybe even become martyrs to them. And that's so much. Again, there's Pippin, who's willing, even though he's the smallest, he is willing to go into battle time and time again. And, sometimes a battle that's more metaphorical, sometimes a battle that's literal, but he's willing to go into that. And all the hobbits are. And I think that's stunning. And I would say, and I don't know what your faith background is, Derek, but, isn't this John Paul II standing up to the Soviets, or
Right.
Mother Teresa standing up to Hillary Clinton? I mean, I think that there's just something about that. Or I'll be non-Catholic for a moment. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, standing up. I mean, I think that there's something so profoundly Christian about, well, Luther, right? Here I stand. I can do no other. And I say that as a Catholic, but that's a profound moment, right? To
Yes.
stand up for that and to say enough. Even if this means my death, enough. This cannot stand. And or for me in the 20th century, Maximilian Kolbe, who stood up against the Nazis in Auschwitz, just incredible, to do that. And I think that Tolkien, who lost his mother at such a young age, and seeing his mother as a martyr, I think that the hobbits all have that potential. They all are possible martyrs in what they're doing, and it's never cheap that they survive. It's not cheap. It's dearly bought that they survive. But there is sacrifice. I mean, we
Right.
don't know Gandalf's coming back. You
Right.
know, so
Right. Well, you've got a whole host of things firing off in my head. So thank you. My background, to answer your question, is sort of traditional American Baptist,
okay.
though that's not what I participate anymore. I deeply appreciate various Catholic writers and thinkers. Was exposed to a good number of them in law school, and hadn't prior to that been that way, but also Eastern Orthodox. Just the breadth of the broader church history is remarkable, and that was, withheld from me uh, through, my college years. And so I'm grateful for the opportunity to explore it later in life. I'm curious about two things. You mentioned
Sure.
Tolkien's mother and her passing, and that she potentially as a martyr. Could you add some detail to that? And then,
Sure.
drawing perhaps either on Catholic theology or just general ideas with respect to obviously the nature and the beauty of the Magnificat with Mary, and
Hmm.
whether or not there's any maternal manifestation in the story that particularly strikes you as Tolkien is. And yes, I think everyone knows Tolkien's passionately Catholic. I mean, he in his private life he was perpetually trying to get Lewis across the line.
Yeah.
So anyway, any thoughts along that spectrum? I'd love to
Yeah,
hear.
sure. So, yeah, two things there, Derek, both central, I think, to our conversation. Tolkien was raised in the Church of England, and he converted to Catholicism at age 12 when his mother converted. But he was of an age, I mean, once you're past age 8, it's age of reason. So this is a conscious decision on his part. Even though he's young, it's still, and his mother did not make him convert. He chose to convert. And part of that, to convert to Roman Catholicism, that would have been, and this is hard for us, I think, now in 2025 to understand, but that would have been one of the most radical statements an Englishman could have made at the time. You're basically selling yourself into second class citizenship by
Yeah.
doing that. You're closing off a million doors by leaving the Church of England. And there was just a lot of prejudice. I mean, to the point where, and I love this story. And again, Derek, if I start talking too long, just stop me. But one of my colleagues here at Hillsdale, and yeah, I think this is a great story. But one of my colleagues here at Hillsdale, he's passed away now, was Sir Martin Gilbert, who was the official biographer of Churchill. And he was in Margaret Thatcher's government, and he was a professor as well. He was Jewish, and that's really important to the story because when Tolkien was retiring from Merton College, Sir Martin was a brand new faculty member at Merton College. And Sir Martin actually took me out to lunch one day with his wife, Lady Esther, and because he wanted to talk Tolkien. They had been very close friends. But even in the late 1950s, Tolkien and Sir Martin had to sit at a separate table during High Table at Oxford because they weren't Church of England. So even in 1959, that prejudice was there that a Catholic could not sit with the Anglicans,
Wow.
and a Jew couldn't either. So Tolkien and Sir Martin got to know each other really well because they always had to sit together. I mean, I'm laughing because it's absurd. It's,
Yes.
just amazing. So there's still, I mean, again, for Tolkien to have made that decision, that's a huge, huge decision. And
Hmm.
others, I don't know if you're familiar with Christopher Dawson, but a very famous Catholic historian, he converted as well in 1914 and could never get a job, even though he was one of the most educated men in England. He ended up coming to Harvard and teaching at Harvard, but he could not get a position in England because of his Catholicism. So there was a lot of prejudice
Well,
about
and
it.
that I would say that's all the more impressive that Tolkien achieved what he did in his
Yes.
academic career.
Yes. No, absolutely. I mean, without question. And Tolkien wore it on his sleeve. He was
Yeah.
not shy about
No.
this at all.
No.
And so, anyway, what I wanted to go back to, and I both appreciate Tolkien and I'm a little uncomfortable with this aspect of him, partly because I teach at Hillsdale. We consider ourselves a little Christendom. So we're about probably 40% Reformed and Evangelical, probably about 25% Roman Catholic, and then Jewish and Eastern Orthodox. So we're all over the place, and I really appreciate that. I mean, I think it's very healthy,
Agreed.
very healthy,
Yeah.
and so and this makes me a little uncomfortable with Tolkien, just a little bit, but Tolkien's mother converted to Catholicism, and when she did, her husband had passed away, so she's a widow. And they were wealthy. the Tolkiens were. The Tolkien family, they owned pianos. They owned Tolkien pianos. So the Tolkien family had a lot of wealth. The pianos would be upright pianos that any middle class family would have had in their home. So they were well off from this. But when Tolkien's mother converted, the family drove her out and would refuse to give her any monetary assistance at all. And then she caught tuberculosis. And it was a tuberculosis, a form that could have easily been cured with the medicines available at the time. And her family refused to pay for it until she renounced her Catholicism. And so for Tolkien, this always meant, this is both beautiful and sad at the same time. It meant that Tolkien absolutely cherished his Catholicism because it was the stuff of myth and legend. His mother was a saint. She was a martyr. But that also meant that for Tolkien, the Protestants were the bad guys. And
Hmm.
so that's where, again, Derek, part of that story is beautiful, part of it's gut-wrenching, because I think Tolkien had a prejudice there that he never fully overcame. And I still think he's pretty open-minded given all of that, especially his best friend C.S. Lewis, right? He's
Right.
got to be open-minded. But I do
Right.
think it affected him pretty dramatically.
Yeah.
As to your second question, then, about visions of the feminine in his understanding, Tolkien blatantly says in his letters that all of his understanding of beauty comes from his understanding of the Virgin Mary, and so there's just no escaping it.
Hmm.
There's no getting around it. And from my own perspective, whenever we look at Tolkien's women, and I get frustrated with academics who say, "Oh, Tolkien doesn't have any women in his story." That's ridiculous. You look at Eowyn, you look at Arwen, you look at Galadriel. I mean, these are incredible women, absolutely. Or Elbereth, Varda from the Silmarillion. These are incredible women, and I would say that every one of Tolkien's women is a combination of the Virgin Mary, his mother, and his wife, whom he totally adored. So I think that there's always a kind of beauty to that. And again, I think we would really misunderstand Tolkien unless we understood that Marian. And here's a very specifically Catholic, well, it's Eastern Orthodox as well, but a very Catholic thing. You remember at the end of the Lord of the Rings, Aragorn, we have the story of Aragorn and Arwen in the appendices. And the reason we get it there is because it's not told from a hobbit's perspective, and so it's in the appendix. But in that story, Aragorn gets to choose when he dies. And it's not suicide. He actually has a conversation with Iluvatar, with God,
Yeah.
and chooses when he dies. Well, that's a very, very Marian moment because from a Catholic and an Eastern Orthodox perspective, Mary chooses her death when her time is to be assumed into heaven, or as the Orthodox would put it, to go into the dormition. So, and I always find that interesting that even though Aragorn is a male, he's actually the most Marian figure in the story because
Mm-hmm.
that is such a specific, I mean, not Protestant at all. It's a very Catholic, very Orthodox understanding of that. So I find that fascinating
Yeah.
overall.
Wow. That's really fascinating. Aragorn is quite a character, and he'll be discussed in a different episode.
Good, good.
But
I'm glad you're doing that.
yeah, absolutely appreciate that.
Yeah, Derek, how many of these episodes are you doing?
Well, we're scheduled already for 16, and there may there may be 18 to 20 when it's all said and done.
Wow, wow.
And the fun part of this, Brad, is every series that we do, the goal is to have it be for both the studious and the curious so that
Sure.
it can be accessible to
Good.
all. And so our guests are a range of folks like you who have done pretty deep study, obviously published a work on Mr. Tolkien's work, and other scholarly guests, and then just passionate lay people who have a different vocation but are just as caught up in the pantheon of Tolkien's writings. And so, yeah, so it's a beautiful mix. It's again, as you described, the fellowship, right? It's representative of the church that everybody gets to participate, and so that's the goal here. So,
Yeah, that's great.
thanks
That's
for
great.
asking. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I'll look forward to. Are you? Now, are the podcasts free?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Do you just post them to YouTube, or where do you?
We're on Apple Podcast, YouTube, Spotify, and then Substack. So,
Great.
yeah,
Oh, okay. I'm on Substack as well. I'll have to. Yeah.
wonderful.
What do you call yourself on Substack?
You can just look up my name, and there I am.
Okay.
So
All right.
I'll I'll do
I'll
I'll do
connect
the
us
same.
tonight. Yeah.
Great. Let's round for home with some more of Pippin, if you don't mind.
Absolutely.
Um, I, I would love to hear some of your thoughts, as you mentioned before, Tolkien's fierce. He's developing a mythology, obviously, and part of that mythology, in my estimation, is connected to his experiences during World War One, as well as the industrial age, and his yearning for the pastoral life and what he sees as the demolition of the English countryside. I'm
Right.
I'm wanting to hear your thoughts on the hobbits uniquely in the Shire and just what he's working towards preserving in that work.
Yeah. No, I'd love to talk about that. Uh, Tolkien's very interesting in terms of his politics. He is, I mean, there's no other way to put this. He was as conservative in his politics as he was Catholic in his religion. And he doesn't talk about politics a lot, but he
Can
does.
can I interject real
Sure.
quick? When you say because you know
Yeah.
England, U.S., they have those terms might have different
Right.
meanings.
Yes.
By conservative in the British sense, would that be like sort of the monarchy, or is there other things at play?
Yes. So his conservatism would not be an American conservatism, which is very, very shaped by libertarianism and
Mm.
free market kind of economics. I'm sure Tolkien appreciated that, but that wasn't what he was going for. He's coming out of a traditional British conservatism that really wanted protection of small town, land, family. So it's a Chestertonian kind of conservatism, right? And so, yeah, the term that would have been used for them would have been distributist. And what they wanted, they're the opposite of Marxists. What they wanted was more property ownership rather than less property ownership. So they would have been very skeptical of large corporations. They would have been as skeptical of large corporations as they would of large government, right? So, yeah, whereas I think for an American conservatives are more skeptical of government than they are business. But that wouldn't be Tolkien's. Tolkien would be, the welfare state's just as bad as Apple controlling everything. Does that make sense, Derek?
Yeah, it does. It does.
So it's a much more landed kind of understanding. And again, it would have been very anti-Marxian, but a kind of idea that, well, you would have your homestead, I would have my homestead, we would garden, we would live with nature. So there's a much more kind of, well,
Would the word provincial be
yes,
appropriate?
yes, absolutely. And I also think in traditional terms, like a love of the environment with it being more conservation in the sense of us in the commands that God gives in Eden to have stewardship over the earth. It doesn't mean we can rape it or pillage it. It means we have to treat it justly, right?
Hmm.
And that's the kind of traditional Christian conservatism that that Tolkien would have believed in. He does, very interestingly, though, he does say in some of his letters, and you never know if he's being playful or not, but he does actually call himself an anarchist. Not a bomb throwing, but one who is so skeptical of the state being good. But in that same letter where he calls himself an anarchist, he also says he's an unconstitutional monarchist. So I think, again, it's this kind of romanticization of the medieval, and again, very Catholic. Though Lewis had a pretty similar view, even though Lewis is definitely not Catholic, but they both had a kind of longing for a medieval understanding
Mm.
if
Hmm.
it had been properly employed, not corrupted. So that there's a kind of love of it, and they're romantics, right? And romanticism is nothing more than a kind of recreation of the medieval for the modern world, right? Whereas a classicist wants to go back to Rome, a romantic wants to go back to medieval Germany or medieval England, and there are things to love. You look at King Alfred, one of the greatest English kings ever, a saint in the Catholic Church, a brilliant leader, the man who codifies common law, right? Our right to a trial by jury, our right to be innocent until proven guilty. That's all from King Alfred. And before him, he
Hmm.
codifies what had already been there.
Hmm.
The Magna Carta comes out of medieval Catholic England, and just critical. So those are the kinds of things that I think they're idealizing. So when Tolkien says an unconstitutional monarchy and anarchy at the same time, he's really thinking before we get to a kind of mechanical liberalism, there was this organic nature to society that he saw as very healthy. And he even says later in his letters, I think this was a letter in either 1968 or 69, there's a person who writes him to do a film treatment of The Lord of the Rings. And Tolkien responds by saying, well, think of Aragorn as Charlemagne, but recreating Europe in the North and the South. And I've always taken that, just given Tolkien's own understanding, I've taken that as a recreation of Protestant and Catholic Europe coming together under Aragorn. So I think he does have a kind of united vision of Christendom. So anyway, Derek, that's a long way of answering you, but that's where Tolkien's coming from. And so the Shire, if we look at the Shire and we look at Pippin and Merry and we look at Frodo and Sam and Bilbo and Fatty and everybody else in the Shire, I I think the Shire is the ultimate representation of an Anglo-Saxon republic. So you think about at the beginning of the story, we find out that there are sheriffs in the Shire. There are only a couple of them, just a handful. And
Yeah.
the only thing that distinguishes them is they have a feather in their cap. And then they say that they're enforcing the king's law, but there hasn't been a king for 1,000 years. And yet they still believe in it, even though there's no
Mm-hmm.
king. And everybody's got their own property. They all farm. They're not mechanical, though they have certain mechanisms that make farming good. They have a mill. They have other things, but they've not industrialized at all. And it's essentially an idealized Anglo-Saxon medieval world in what he's getting at. And even the Shire, if you look back at the Magna Carta at the very beginning says, I'm speaking to everybody here, my lords, my barons, my bishops, my sheriffs, and the sheriff was always the head of a shire.
Yes.
So it was an actual legal entity that you had. In the same way you could have a barony, you also have a shire, and a shire was made up of free folk under a sheriff.
Hmm.
And they weren't beholden to any noble at all. They lived freely as small r republicans. And so I think that's what Tolkien is really getting at. And even in the scouring of the Shire, which I know Peter Jackson didn't do anything with, but I don't see how you can end The Lord of the Rings without the scouring of the Shire. And I respect Peter Jackson's movies. I still love the books more than the movies, far by far, not even a question. But I do think that the movies failed in not showing the scouring of the Shire. I think it's just critical because here you have these four hobbits who've been to hell.
Right.
They've been to hell and
Right.
back, and they've seen everything under the sun, and they come back home, and home is not what it was.
Right.
It's been overturned, and there's a tyranny, and they don't know who's in charge, and they're trying to figure it out, and it's a creepy tyranny because all they know is there's a man who's in charge, and then they find out his name is Sharky, and then they find out it's Saruman, but they don't know that at the beginning. It's just all these hobbits who have conformed and turned over what they believed and are scared, and it's horrible. The
Yeah.
shower, which the Shire, which was essentially not utopia, but you know,
Pretty
it
close.
it would have been my grandfather's Kansas. Kind of a beautiful image of people living together in real community, and it's overturned. And they've industrialized and they've torn up the farms. And so then, you look at someone like Sam, after they've overthrown the Shire, what does Sam do? He takes the gift from Galadriel and he puts one grain of soil with every tree he plants. And so the Shire becomes even more agrarian than it already was. Yeah, and they tear down all the industry, they tear down the brick buildings, everything that smacked of all of that. And that's Tolkien. That's his conservatism. And yet, going all the way back to the beginning of our conversation, America being both radical and conservative at the same time, that's Tolkien. The Shire is revolutionizing, and yet it's going back to what was, but it's even better than what it had been. Right? So it's
Boy.
tradition on steroids.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Boy, there's
Just
a host of
incredible.
host of things that pop into my mind as you're speaking. I don't know if you're familiar with the British theologian John Milbank,
I'm not.
but he'll often comment. He would be in Tolkien's camp in terms of the monarchy, kind of that medieval glory, the Arthurian legends,
Yeah.
etc. And there's a part of me that wonders, again, how much these guys romanticize, just as people wistfully long for periods that they didn't inhabit, based on colorful pictures and books and stories that came down. Although there's a thread of truth to them all. Yeah. Anyway, and then lastly, as you described the Shire coming back even more shirey than it was
Yeah.
before, I think of Owen Barfield's concept of final participation. That
Mm,
it's not an either or, as you say. It's a fuller
yes.
flowering of the true glory of the image of God in everyone. So
Yeah, absolutely. Right.
yeah,
And
that's
remember, I mean, even, everything grows beautifully. They now have a Malorn tree where the party tree was. Yeah, and that year 1420 is a golden year. More babies are born that year than any other year. It's just everything goes right in
yeah,
that year.
yeah.
It's
Oh,
truly an annus mirabilis, right? It's a year
oh,
of miracle.
that's beautiful. I've got two final questions, if
Sure.
that's okay. Um,
Absolutely.
Curious about Pippin's arc with respect to the concept of redemption. And
Hmm.
then final question is just any final thoughts about Pippin's character and how we can learn and grow as a consequence.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Thanks, Derek. Um, So a couple of things. Remind me again what the first part was of your
Just
question
the manifestation of redemption through
of
Pippin's
redemption. Yeah,
character.
yeah. Again, it's funny. I mean, I think you see real redemption in the other characters. I mean, the most obvious redemption is Boromir, where he sacrifices his life to save the hobbits, to save Pippin and Merry. Right? He gives his life even after he has sinned greatly. He he conquers sin, or grace conquers it. Right? Um, Through him. And that's Aragorn's final words to him, right? You have conquered. Uh, Beautiful, beautiful moment. So you see that there. But Pippin always has a bit of the innocence to him. He never, I think, of all the characters in The Lord of the Rings, he and Sam seem the least fallen. And it's not that they're unfallen, but they don't have the kind of, and Mary as well, and Frodo to a certain extent, but the hobbits just have that innocence to them that they don't seem quite as fallen as anyone else. So I don't know if there's a redemptive arc to Pippin, except to say that he becomes more heroic once he finds himself in a situation. He responds properly, like we talked about earlier, where he's at the wall of Mordor and he takes out the troll. That's amazing,
Right.
to be able to do that and to fight that. And even when he's fighting in Moria, he doesn't sit there and think, oh, I'm a small guy, I can't do this. He pulls his sword out and he fights. So he's doing this and he's doing great stuff all along. So if there's a redemption to him, it's more that he becomes greater than he was through all of this, and later becomes the Took, right? He's the Thrain, of his part of the Shire, and he and Merry go around and they explore Middle Earth, and ultimately they're buried next to Aragorn, that we find out in the appendices. So kind of a beautiful moment for them where they've really transcended their own limitations. So the second part of your question, Derek.
Any final thoughts on Pippin just generally?
Yeah. So what I like so much about Pippin is Pippin, and we haven't talked about this yet, except to say he's so critical to the plot. So think about when he's taken by the orcs. The orcs take him to Fangorn. And when he gets to Fangorn, he meets Treebeard. He and Merry do. And they convince Treebeard to attack Isengard. And so something that no one ever would have expected. Here these hobbits show up, these tiny creatures show up in the middle of Fangorn. They rouse the Ents. The Ents have not been roused for 3 ages. They've not been roused. And here they meet these little hobbits, and the hobbits convince them to fight. And of course, without Saruman, without taking out Saruman, they never could have taken out Mordor. Right? They're fighting on two fronts.
Yeah.
And so it's critical. And then we get to Gondor. And what does Pippin do? Pippin gives himself over to Denethor and becomes a member of Denethor's house and stands by him, even though Denethor is cruel. Denethor is not, basically the way to put this from my perspective, Derek, is we've got 3 kings, even though Denethor is a steward, but he serves as a king. You have Aragorn, who's a Christian king. You have Theoden, who's a good pagan king. And then you have Denethor, who's a bad pagan king. Right? They even say at one point he's a heathen. He will die like the heathens. But remember, it's Pippin who figures out what's going on with Denethor when Denethor wants to burn Faramir alive. And so it's Pippin then who goes down, finds Gandalf. Gandalf's in the middle of battle and has a million other things to do. Pippin convinces him to come save Faramir. And Gandalf changes his mind and he saves Faramir. And all that is Pippin.
Wow.
All of that. Right?
Yeah.
And that's where I think, just from a plot standpoint, you could not have The Lord of the Rings without Pippin at all. But he's crucial to 2 of the most important events in the whole story. He's absolutely crucial. That's why, and again, if we were just talking Lord of the Rings for a moment before we really knew each other, Derek, we would
Right.
say it's Frodo, Aragorn, and Gandalf. And we would think of Merry and Pippin as kind of comedic figures. But I think they're a lot more than that.
Yeah.
A lot more.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Brad.
Derek, it's so fun getting to know you. And I'm going to
too.
follow you now, and I'm gonna stalk you.
I'll do the same. I already started. Today's episode of The Plunge sponsored by the poem Ho, 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 to the Bottle I Go. According to Tolkien Gateway, that poem is the first line of a short poem found in the chapter A Shortcut to Mushrooms in the Fellowship of the Ring. According to the chapter, Frodo, Sam, and Pippin have recently left the accompaniment of the High Elves, and to their delight, they have found that they had filled their bottles with a clear drink, pale golden in color. The liquor lightened their spirits and prompted the following song from Sam and Pippin. Ho, 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 to the bottle I go, to heal my heart and drown my woe. Rain may fall and wind may blow, and many miles be still to go. But under a tall tree I will lie, and let the clouds go sailing by. Thank you, elves, for your pale golden liquor, and thank you, Ho Ho Ho, to the Bottle I Go, for sponsoring today's episode of The Plunge.